Welcome to New York's #2 sports show. We have a lot of Rangers news. Jacob Trouba, the captain, has been traded to the Anaheim Ducks in exchange for defenseman Urho Vaakanainen and a conditional fourth-round pick in 2025. It's between the Ducks' own pick and the Detroit Red Wings pick. Whichever one is the lower of the two will go to the Rangers. But also Igor Shesterkin has signed an 8-year contract extension with a average annual value of $11.5 million. So we'll start out with Trouba. And this was something that was coming for a while, but it's nice to see it finally come to fruition. So really, this dates back to the offseason when there were rumors, and probably was true, where there was a deal in place with, I believe, the Detroit Red Wings that Trouba blocked. And, at the very least, Drury was trying to get rid of Trouba. It didn't happen. I guess they came to the agreement that they would, give it a chance, see what was going to happen going into the season. And early returns were not very good. And look, Jacob Trouba, and we'll discuss kind of the Ranger career that was for Trouba and in summary, but things were just getting worse and worse for him, regardless of the trade rumors. You add that into the mix, and it's a bad recipe. And I think getting him out of here is a definite step in the right direction in more ways than one. And look, things I feel like are still kind of in flux as far as this roster is concerned, but I definitely think this is a great move. And the biggest thing that I didn't mention yet as far as that trade with the Ducks is that the Rangers retained zero of the salary, full contract going to the Anaheim Ducks. That's $8 million off the books this season and $8 million off the books next season. Now, obviously, with the Shesterkin contract, as far as next season goes, that's 11.5. So a lot of it goes to Igor off the bat. But in staying with the Trouba move, it's really a great deal for Chris Drury. I mean, to me, Jacob Trouba, you look at that contract, there's negative value there. He has not been very good. The good thing is Anaheim has a ton of cap space, a lot of cap space. And so I guess they figured that it was worth it bringing him in as a veteran, someone that, I guess can help some of the younger players. I think his on-ice performance is not going to be very good for them. He joins former Rangers Ryan Strome and Frank Petrano. And as far as Trouba goes, I believe Chris Drury gave him some options as far as deals that were on the table. And I'm not sure if it was the final two, but if it did come down to Anaheim or Columbus, I guess Trouba and his family preferred Anaheim. So he goes out west. Here's the thing, though, and Pat Verbeek, the GM, former Ranger, Verbeek is the one that makes this deal for Anaheim. I think that there is a thought there that they could flip Trouba either this season or next season. In my mind, I would almost be surprised if he – you never know, I guess, because Trouba definitely is very family-oriented. And so it's possible that, he may feel like that's a place for him to stay in the long run. But I would more think that there's a chance, and Verbeek maybe wants to build up Trouba's value a little bit and have the ability to trade him. And he would probably retain salary in that deal. And maybe he goes to a playoff contender. Again, that's not a Ranger concern, but just in trying to understand why this trade happened, I think it can be a win for both teams, but it definitely is for the Rangers. There's just no way around it. I mean, to have no salary retention for Barclay Goodrow and Jacob Trouba just off the books completely is a win in of itself. Honestly, you could have seen a world where the Rangers would have had to either retain salary or add a draft pick or prospect to sweeten up the deal. Or, in the past, we've seen the Rangers do buyouts and things like that, and that has an effect down the road. So to just be done with it is great. And so what it means for the roster right now, before we kind of just, recap Trouba's Ranger career quickly, is Victor Mancini is called up. Now it's going to be Lindgren with Fox, Miller with Schneider, Jones with Mancini. Now, Vaakanainen, he is out right now with an upper body injury. He has not played since, I believe, mid-November. I don't really know what to expect with him. He is a defensive first defenseman, doesn't have much offense to his game, more of a depth D-man. He was a former first-round pick by the Boston Bruins. He was involved in the Bruins Ducks trade involving Hampus Lindholm. So Lindholm went from the Ducks to the Bruins, Vaakanainen from the Bruins to the Ducks. I think he played a little shy of 70 games last season. Vaakanainen actually put up a I think his plus minus was reasonable, maybe close to even on a pretty poor Ducks team. So it's a $1.1 million cap hit for Vaakanainen. He'll be a restricted free agent at the end of the season. We'll see what comes of this. Like, he may have really no role on this team. I think that is possible. That is a range of outcomes that could exist. Or maybe he gets an opportunity and can be someone that is depended upon. So certainly notable, but remains to be seen as far as where Vaakanainen lies on the Rangers' plans. But for now, the biggest thing for me is Braden Schneider. I think he's going to get like a big opportunity, and one that I'm excited to see what happens. I think Braden Schneider has been a solid defenseman. He's gotten a little bit better as time has gone on. And I think now the big thing was like the penalty kill, for example, where that had been Lindgren with Trouba. Now Schneider is going to have a pretty big role on that, on one of the PK units, and he will be relied upon more than he had been. I mean, I think that's a pretty big deal here. It's not as if Braden Schneider's ice time was sheltered, but it's going to increase pretty dramatically, and that's a good thing for evaluation. Victor Mancini as well. Mancini, who, to no fault of his own, he was sent down. He did a pretty nice job, in training camp, making the team, and kind of just a numbers game. Once Ryan Lindgren came back from his injury, it kind of closed Mancini out. So now he gets a chance. And I think that's important again, because I think that the Rangers are still a team that is looking, they're still a win now team. But now what you get to do is you get to see how some young players perform in different situations where the trade deadline is still months away. So I'm totally fine with giving the young kids a shot, seeing how it goes. And if it doesn't go that well, you have the ability to still, especially with all this cap space now, you can still make moves. So all I know is that the biggest thing for me on this team was the defense needed to be switched up. And this is just step one. Hey, there's another defenseman or two on this core that I think is definitely in danger of being traded. Ryan Lindgren's an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season, and I really don't believe that Lindgren will be back. It doesn't mean he's going to be traded, but I'd be pretty surprised if he is re-signed. And so Lindgren, he could, in theory, be at risk. And I guess if Vaakanainen played well, you could somehow have a replacement of Vaakanainen for Lindgren. But again, I think that's taking it a little bit too far right now. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Lindgren. I mean, Keandre Miller's a restricted free agent. So just because, it's a step in the right direction, but I still think this defense needs even more of an overhaul. But let's see where it goes. And I'm very curious. It's a very young defense. Think about that. I mean, Jacob Trouba was the elder statesman. Now the oldest guy. It's crazy to think about are Lindgren and Fox. Those are your veteran defensemen on this team. Where else do I want to go with this? I guess with Trouba, this is now the the last three Ranger captains have been traded midseason. Ryan Callahan for Marty St. Louis at the trade deadline in 2014. Ryan McDonough to the Tampa Bay Lightning at the trade deadline in 2018. And this one's a little bit different where, again, this really ideally would have been done in the offseason. But I guess, Trouba didn't want it, and I guess they were willing to give it a chance. But with Trouba, it's funny. On a personal note, I actually happened to be at Trouba's first game as a Ranger, and as it turns out, his last game as a Ranger. I was at his first game, ironically, against Winnipeg, the opening night game of the 1920 season, and then I was at the game Monday night against the Devils. So, and I would say that for Trouba, who became the captain after the 21-22 season, definitely to me was more of a negative than a positive overall. Obviously, he becomes a captain. Like there were positives that he brought to the table. Don't get me wrong, but I think that for what the contract was, and it was a big one, right? What was that? It was an 8-year. I think when the deal happened for and it involved Neil Pionk, it was a situation where this was like an 8-year deal. $8 million per, that just wasn't worth it. Now, to think about season by season, the first year, he wasn't I felt that wasn't a great season for Trouba. I mean, at that point, he was coming off of a 50-point season with the Winnipeg Jets. Now, at this point, you got to remember, and I mean, look, Jacob Trouba got power play time up and like through last season. Now, it was on the second unit, but I remember like night one, he was on that first power play unit. Then eventually it was Tony DeAngelo. Then eventually it was Adam Fox. I mean, Trouba did not belong there. And to be honest, he was on that second power play unit for way, way too long, years too long. So he was someone that was seen as like an offensive threat. And that really was not the case, especially the last couple of seasons. But yeah, year one to me, not a great one for Trouba. Well, I guess it wasn't a disaster, but it wasn't very good based on expectation. And Brady Shea they were friends and they were partners. Shea got traded away that season. Like that was a bad pair. Then 2020, 2021, that wasn't good either. I mean, then you bring Keandre Miller into the mix, and I'm pretty sure Miller Trouba was a thing pretty much from the beginning. So Trouba was mainly with Keandre Miller in the better part of the 4+ seasons of Keandre Miller's career. It was those two together. He ended up not finishing out that season. I think he got hurt against the Islanders. I think it might have been a concussion. And so he played 38 out of he had been relatively healthy in his Ranger career. That season, though, not so much. He missed a good amount of time. His best season was Gerard Gallant's first as a Rangers head coach. So the first 2 years, David Quinn. Gerard Gallant comes in 21-22, and Trouba puts up a pretty nice season. 11 goals, 28 assists, 39 points, and a plus 25. However, in the playoffs, I can't help but think about Game 4 against the Tampa Bay Lightning and beyond just that game. Like to me, he single-handedly lost that game for the Rangers, which was a pivotal swing point in that. Oh no, sorry, not Game 4, Game 3. Game 3, Rangers up 2-0. Chance to go 3-0. He took a lot of penalties, had a lot of bad turnovers. It's just that's what it is. And so I felt like Trouba's playoffs wasn't great. And then he becomes captain in 22-23. He wasn't as good as he was the year before. He was okay. Right? I mean, I'd say he was better then than he had been like in the David Quinn era, but still not as good as the 22 season, which was his best, that led him to be named captain. And he's known for a lot of these big hits. You know, he was definitely seen as a good leader in the locker. You know, the Rangers didn't have really any captain options. That's kind of like, I didn't agree with Trouba being named captain. And now it's funny because now we're back to a point where there is no captain, and I would just stick with that for a while. To me, there is no rush to name a captain. Like, let it just go. See how it evolves. To me, like the Rangers showed that in the 2022 season that they could still win hockey games and make a run without having a captain. Now I'll fast forward to last season, and that was just really bad. Offense is completely non-existent. Defensively, he's worse. Was really bad in the playoffs. Just to a point where, because I was never really the biggest Jacob Trouba fan to begin with. But it just got to a point where it was, beyond poor. And now it leads us to this season where it was just like he wasn't, you could tell where this was headed. But it is, again, it's nice that it's over. It wasn't without some successes, for sure. I mean, look, like he was named captain. Whether I agree with it or not, he was. And now he's an Anaheim Duck. So he will be reunited with Ryan Strome and Frank Vetrano. But we'll see what the future holds for Trouba. But now let's go to Igor Shesterkin. So Shesterkin, this was something that we knew was in the works. And look, it's a little bit more than you'd want, to be honest with you. I mean, $11.5 million per season. It's basically about double what he had been making. So he was at about 5.67, what was the cap hit. And now, starting next season, for 8 years, 11.5. So it is the richest, highest contract in NHL history for a goaltender. Now, it's tough because Igor needs to be part of this. Igor, to me, and I know that there's inconsistencies there in the regular season, but Igor, pound for pound, he is kind of the guy on this team. I know there's Artemi Panarin. I know there's Adam Fox. I get all that, but Igor Shesterkin is the backbone of this team. And come playoff time, he is the glue. He is the consistency there. I mean, if there's one thing we can say is that in the playoffs, he is so dialed in. And so I think this is this is more good news than bad news. It's a necessary evil that Igor Shesterkin, is paid, to this contract. And I understand that a big segment of the fan base is upset by this. I get that, but you couldn't let him walk. You're not going to trade him, even though I know like some people would think, hey, because you probably would get some, good return for him. But Igor Shesterkin, in a long line of Ranger goalies, because that has been, in the Rangers' history, goaltending has been the Rangers' thing more than anything else. And Igor Shesterkin falls right in line with that. Now, the interesting thing is he is on a 5-game losing streak in the middle of this becoming, I don't know if as I'm recording this, I don't believe that this is official, but it's going to happen. It's been reported by numerous sources. So it's going to happen and become official very soon. Look, this season, he got off to a really good start, but now he's 8-9-1. The save percentage is 908, which actually isn't that bad considering he has a 3.05 goals against average. So Igor, there was always a lot of hype around Igor Shesterkin for a very long time. He was a fourth-round pick in 2014, but it was always known he was someone that put up big-time numbers in the KHL for years, to the point where eventually he was Henrik Lundqvist's successor. He comes in 1920 as well. 1920 was a big year for change. And I've spoken about that in one of the previous episodes where that's when Trouba came in, Panarin, Fox, Kakko. What I didn't mention was Igor did as well in the middle of that season. Like Ryan Lindgren, he became like a full-time starter that season. So a lot of what you see now really developed that season. Of course, you already had a couple of others already in place, like Kreider, Zibanejad, Hedel, to name a few. But Shesterkin has really been great since he got here. And there was a lot of pressure on him. To replace Henrik Lundqvist is no easy thing. And he was really good. We saw him for about 12 games, and then COVID happened. And at that point, he was, really already good. And he was in Hartford to start that season and just absolutely dominated Hartford. He was so good. I mean, him being there is kind of funny when you look back at it in hindsight. But he was really good then. Then the next year, the shortened season after COVID, he was all right. Although here's the funny thing. What ends up kind of being the outlier was the Vezina winning season of 2022, which also got him as an MVP finalist. 935 save percentage, 207 goals against average. I mean, just unbelievable. He was so good and was really good in the playoffs. Got off to a shaky start against the Penguins, but then once he settled in, was fantastic through the Lightning series. And then really since then, he has been a bit inconsistent. The final numbers end up being pretty good. He really finds himself in a situation where he gets no less than a 915 save percentage with, a good amount of wins. Again, there is a consistency in terms of the final numbers for Igor, and I'd expect that to be the same this season, where right now they're definitely less than what he's accustomed to, but he'll find that level again. There's no doubt about that. So, and we know in the playoffs, he's as good as they come. So it's one of those things where it's tough to celebrate it because it puts the Rangers in a tough position. There's a big time commitment to Igor Shesterkin, but at the same time, you have to acknowledge that his worth to the team and that you do need him. I understand that a lot of teams have won the cup without necessarily high-paid goalies, although last year, Sergei Bobrovsky is an example of that being the case. Now, Florida was really good beyond Bobrovsky. Bobrovsky was a huge, huge part and piece of the puzzle. In fact, and I should probably know this offhand, but Bobrovsky, was it McDavid that won the Conn Smythe in a losing effort? Either way, it was either McDavid who won Conn Smythe in a losing effort, or it was Bobrovsky who won, for Florida. Either way, the point being is that it is important to have good goaltending. Just as good as Jonathan Quick has been, you take Igor out of this mix, and the Rangers do not really have a realistic chance of competing for a Stanley Cup. That's just what it is, and that's where they are right now. So, Igor in the fold long term. He is, he's got the longest. Like he will be here, contract wise through 2033, which is the most now. It had been Alexis Lafreniere after he signed his deal, but now it will be Igor. And so what that means is, as far as like Quick will be the backup for however long it is, and I hope that he stays that way because he's been really good for the Rangers. But who your starting goaltender is for a long time. And just a really big day, just in summary, a really, really big day today in Rangerland. I mean, Jacob Trouba being dealt, the captain, is a big deal. And how will the Rangers respond to this? I hope in the right way, but knowing what we've seen lately, and there was some pretty tough comments from Trouba after the fact, which we don't have to get into. But he was saying it's a rite of passage to get fired at MSG. It was a threat put out there that they'd place him on waivers, which again it's within Drury's right that if he didn't waive his no trade clause, which he did, to go to the Ducks, that they were going to put him on waivers. Like that's just the way that it is. And I know it's cutthroat, but like this had to be done. And so you wish that Trouba would take a little more accountability, but again, it's fresh. It just happened, and so maybe upon reflection, he won't be as upset about it. But, again, I get it. But it's a business. I mean, this happened with Ryan McDonagh in Tampa, where they basically said, hey, we're going to waive you. But we also have a deal. And if that happened, I think Columbus would have been the one that would have gotten him. But instead, they worked a deal with Nashville. And so McDonagh got traded to Nashville. And now, what do you know? McDonagh's back on the Lightning. So I don't expect that with Trouba. But again, Jacob Trouba traded to the Anaheim Ducks for defenseman Urho Vaakanainen and a conditional 2025 fourth-round pick, the lower of the draft picks between Anaheim and Detroit. So likely it'll be Detroit. It's the worser of the two. So probably you'd figure Detroit will finish higher than Anaheim. Again, somewhat negligible. And Anaheim's taking on all of Jacob Trouba's $8 million this season and next season. And then Igor Shesterkin, an 8-year contract extension with an average annual value of $11.5 million. We will see where things go from here, but this is the first big domino to fall for the New York Rangers as they have traded their captain, Jacob Trouba, to the Anaheim Ducks.